Good evening. In welcome news for many households, the rate of inflation is at its lowest for 2 years, which economists say is a boost for real spending. Lower energy and fuel bills have been major factors in driving inflation down. In January, the cost of living was up by 1.8%, and that is below the Bank of England's target of 2%. And wages are now rising faster than prices, which means that those wages are going further every month. But as our economics correspondent Andy Verity explains, there are some downsides too.
Do you fancy some dinner?
At home in Bolton, Melanie G and Jason Sharples are among millions of households who've benefited from cheaper bills. As a sales executive for a successful packaging company, Jason's seen his wages rise faster than prices for 5 years now, allowing him to buy more with his pay. And other elements of the cost of living are getting more manageable, not less.
I do think that petrol has gone a lot cheaper than it were. It's still expensive, and I think as a country, we are charging too much for fuel. But petrol, I would say, and I can't really think of much more that has gone a lot cheaper. Yes, food, certain foods.
Pay rises have been so weak for so long. The average rise now of 3.3% is the highest since 2009. But compare that with prices and your spending power, the gap between the two is growing faster than it has in 2 years.
Just don't go out spending willy-nilly. I'll just be still spend carefully, but I'm living a comfortable life.
There's also little sign of inflationary pressure from the rest of the world, with prices paid by producers for imported supplies such as raw materials rising only modestly. While the energy price cap played a part in driving inflation down, there's another factor at play: the global slowdown. The more people around the world want to buy and sell and trade goods and transport them around the world, the more oil they need to do it. If there isn't enough to go round, those who want it most will pay more for it, and that pushes up the price. But when the world slows down, that goes into reverse. There's plenty of oil and the price drops, and with it, the price of energy. If cheaper bills are making life more affordable, then for now at least, the global slowdown may have helped. But will it last? What boosted our spending power in the past was each worker producing more per hour than they did the year before, so businesses could afford inflation-beating pay rises. Right now, that's barely happening.
Falling inflation means the gap between wages and prices is as big as it was on the eve of the EU referendum for the first time. That's great news, but it can only be short term. For that gap to get bigger, what we're going to need is improvements in productivity, and those have been lacking for far too long.
Cheaper oil and energy may have helped to boost living standards, but it's also a byproduct of the global economic slowdown. The silver lining of better living standards is accompanied by a big grey cloud. Andy Verity, BBC News.
Well, one of the biggest bills that households face is council tax. And there are warnings tonight from a survey of councils in England that those bills are set to rise. Let's talk to our home editor, Mark Easton, who's been looking at this survey. Mark, what kind of rises are we talking about and how extensive?
Well, just over a third of English councils responded to the survey, and almost every single one said council tax would rise. 3/4 of them said it would rise by at least 2.5%. And most of those, I suspect, are going to be putting it up by almost 3%, which is the maximum that most councils are allowed to put it up without having a local referendum. But this shouldn't come as a surprise, actually. The government in December trumpeted an increase of £1.3 billion in local authorities' core spending power, which sounds great, but that increase assumes that every council will raise council tax by the 3% maximum that they're allowed to do. Local government has seen central government funding, the money it gets from Whitehall, cut by 60% since 2010. And council leaders say that even with some of the extra money that was announced in the budget last year, they're still facing a spending gap of over £3,000 million, a £3 billion shortfall. So even with putting council tax up, they're going to need to be cutting. 29% said they'll cut adult social care, 24% they're going to be cutting children's care, and more than half of them said they're going to be having to dip into their reserves. Now, the government says that the councils have had £1 billion more this year, and they will be able to keep more of business rates and some other money too. But all eyes are going to be on the spending review in March. Will the Chancellor listen to town halls who are saying right now that they're struggling to protect even the most vital local services?
Mark, many thanks again. Mark Easton, our home editor.